What would you do if today was your last day alive? It's a question people throw around in podcasts, in late-night conversations, or on the back of coffee shop napkins. Most folks would say something poetic, "I'd call my mom," or "I'd see the ocean one more time." Maybe they'd book a flight, kiss someone they shouldn't, eat something terrible for their arteries. But Jack Turner didn't ask for poetry. He didn't ask for redemption. He asked for his dog. "I just want to see Max again. That's all." The room went quiet when he said it. A prison warden blinked in confusion. A chaplain shifted awkwardly in his seat. The guard who had walked Jack into the meeting room dropped his eyes, like he'd just heard a ghost whisper something too human. It was just past noon inside Texas State Penitentiary, Unit 6, also known as the Final Yard. It's where the state sent those they were done with. The walls were beige, the clocks had no second hands, and the light buzzed like it had forgotten how to be silent. Jack sat across from Warden Collins, who looked more like an insurance agent than the man in charge of legally ending people's lives. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Collins asked, his tone not mocking, just stunned. Jack leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Max. My dog. I want to see him. Just once. Before the end." There was a beat of silence so heavy it made the clock on the wall feel too loud. Collins looked over to the chaplain, as if hoping the man of God might offer a policy-based answer. But the chaplain only looked at Jack, and something in his face softened. "How long's it been since you've seen him?" the chaplain asked. Jack blinked. His jaw tensed slightly. 12 years. They took him when I got arrested. He was 2 then. Border collie mix. Smart as hell. Loyal like no one else ever was. The way he said it, you'd think he was talking about his child. In a way, he was. The request went viral. By nightfall, a local news station had leaked the story, "Death Row Inmate's Final Wish? A Visit from His Dog." The headline was designed to provoke. Social media lit up. Comment sections flooded with opinions, anger, sympathy, and cynicism. Some raged. Why should a killer get anything? He didn't give his victim a last wish. Others softened. He's not asking for freedom. He just wants his dog. Let him have that. Then came the dog lovers. The animal rescues. The prison reformers. The late-night hosts who joked about it, and the daytime talk shows who took it seriously. But while the world debated morality from behind screens, Jack sat alone in his 8-by-12 cell. No phone. No screen. No idea that outside these walls, the world had stopped to talk about his simple, final wish. At 11:02 p.m., Warden Collins got a call from the governor's office. The voice on the line wasn't warm. "Is this request going to be a problem?" they asked. "People are watching." Collins sighed. "You don't get it. This isn't about logistics. This is about control. If you give them one thing, next time they'll ask for 2. That's what we've built this place on. Finality. Not sentiment." The voice replied, "I don't care about your philosophy. I care about headlines. Make it happen." Quietly. Collins hung up the phone and cursed under his breath. The next morning, Jack was brought back into the visitation room. He didn't know yet what had changed, only that the guards were acting strange, like people trying not to be human in front of someone they were about to lose. Collins entered, carrying a folder. He sat across from Jack and stared at him for a few moments. "You made the news," he said flatly. "Congratulations." Jack looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Your dog. The request. People out there are talking about it. Can't believe it, but it seems you hit a nerve." Jack's eyes narrowed. "So, is that a no?" Collins opened the folder. Inside was a printed memo. "We're exploring it. There's pressure. Jack almost smiled, but stopped himself. He'd learned not to hope too quickly. Max is alive. Collins nodded reluctantly. Animal Rescue Center in Amarillo has him. Old, arthritic, but alive. They've been trying to get a hold of you for years, but the paperwork vanished somewhere in intake. Classic bureaucracy. Jack let the silence stretch. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. 12 years, and he waited for me. Collins closed the folder. We're making arrangements. No promises. You'll be notified. As the guards escorted Jack out, the chaplain stayed behind. Why the dog? He asked Collins quietly. Collins shook his head. You don't get it, do you? That man's life fell apart. Lost everything. But the one thing he still wants. It ain't revenge, it ain't justice. It's just a damn dog. That night, Jack dreamed. He was 16 again, and Max was a puppy, small, scrappy, biting everything in sight. They were lying in tall grass behind Jack's old house, back when his mom was still alive. Max was barking at the sky like he could scare off the stars. Jack was laughing. When he woke up, his cell felt different. Colder. Sharper. But there was something under the surface now. Something he hadn't felt in years. Not joy. Not peace. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before he was inmate number 734219, before headlines twisted his name into a controversy, Jack Turner was just a quiet kid from Denton, Texas. He wasn't popular. He wasn't dangerous. If you had to describe him in one word, it would have been invisible. His story didn't start with a crime. It started on a front porch, in the middle of a humid summer, with the sound of cicadas screaming in the trees and a boy sitting barefoot on wooden steps, clutching a paper cup of lemonade. Next to him, curled at his feet, was a scruffy black and white mutt with ears too big for its head. Max. That dog wasn't just his pet, it was the first living thing that ever loved him back. Jack found Max behind a dumpster outside a gas station on his walk home from school. He couldn't have been more than 10, and the dog was barely old enough to stand. Mangy, terrified, ribs poking out. Jack brought him home in his backpack, zipped halfway open so Max could breathe. He gave him a bath in the kitchen sink and fed him half a hot dog, the only meat left in the fridge. His dad, Travis Turner, didn't say a word about it. Didn't ask. Didn't look. He just took another sip from his bottle and disappeared into the garage, where the radio played old country songs too loud and the stench of motor oil never quite faded. Jack's mom had died 2 years before that, from cancer, they said, though Jack had never fully understood it. One day she was brushing his hair and humming Patsy Cline. The next, her bed was empty and her scent was gone. After that, the house grew colder. And quieter. So when Max licked his face that first night and whimpered softly as Jack wrapped them both in a blanket, something inside the boy shifted. Like maybe he wasn't alone anymore. Jack didn't have many friends growing up. The other kids called him Ghost Boy, because he was always staring out the window or scribbling in a notebook. He didn't fight back when pushed. He didn't yell when mocked. He just endured. But Max was different. Max growled at bullies. Max barked at shadows. Max would lie across Jack's chest when the nightmares came, those dreams where Jack saw his mom's empty bed, or heard his father yelling at no one. It was Max who stood between Jack and his father the first time Travis raised his hand. It was Max who dragged the shotgun out from under the porch one rainy afternoon, tugging it by the strap as if even he knew that it didn't belong there. And it was Max who stayed with Jack, silently, when he got his GED, when he got his first job at the auto shop, when he bought a beat-up Ford with saved tips and named it Lucky, even though nothing in his life had ever really been lucky. By the time Jack was 26, Max was already slowing down. His paws had grayed, and his favorite thing was no longer chasing squirrels but curling up under Jack's workbench at the garage. Still, Jack would swear the dog could read his moods better than any human. When his dad finally drank himself into a stroke and passed, Max didn't move for a whole day. Just lay beside the front door, waiting for someone who would never come back. After the funeral, Jack stood alone at the edge of the cemetery while the rest of the town scattered. He had no siblings. No cousins nearby. No girlfriend. No close friends. He had Max. That was it. And maybe that's why things unraveled so fast when Max got hurt. It happened one night in early October. A neighbor, Harold Finch, had moved in across the street 2 months prior. A wiry, sour-faced man in his late 40s, with a temper like gasoline and a tendency to shout at everything that moved. Jack had caught him once throwing a beer bottle at a stray cat. The man didn't apologize. On that particular evening, Jack came home late from work and found Max limping up the porch steps, bleeding from the ear. Furious, he stormed across the street and banged on Harold's door. They argued. Loud. Harsh. Words flew like punches. Jack never denied that part. But what happened after, that's where things blurred. Later that night, Harold Finch was found dead in his living room. Blunt force trauma. No weapon ever recovered. A neighbor claimed they saw Jack leave the house shortly before the cops arrived. His fingerprints were on Harold's front doorknob. His shirt had blood on the sleeve, Max's blood, but no one cared to test it. Jack insisted he hadn't killed anyone. That he'd argued, yes, but left before things got physical. But the state saw a story, a volatile man with no family, no alibi, a dead neighbor he'd just fought with. And a dog with a wound, evidence of motive. They called it a crime of passion. Said he snapped. That he'd finally cracked. The trial lasted 6 days. His court-appointed attorney called 2 witnesses. The prosecution called 8. The jury took 4 hours to decide. Guilty. First-degree murder. Death penalty. Jack didn't cry when the sentence came down. He just looked down at his hands and asked a single question. Who's got Max? 12 years passed like wind over gravel. People outside forgot his name. Files gathered dust. Max, it turned out, had been sent to a shelter. But paperwork disappeared, and no one ever told Jack where he'd gone. Just more system failures. Another quiet tragedy. Jack spent his years behind bars thinking about the sound of Max's paws on the hardwood floor. About the way he used to tilt his head when confused. About how he never flinched, even when humans did their worst. Max had been the best part of him. And he'd lost him without a goodbye. So when they asked, years later, what his last request was, what he wanted as his final moment of life, he didn't even blink. I want to see my dog. The truth is, it was over before it even started. The night Harold Finch died, the sky was clear, the town was quiet, and Jack Turner was already guilty in the eyes of everyone who mattered. He just didn't know it yet. He'd worked a double shift that day, his hands were greasy, his shoulders aching. All he wanted was a hot shower, a cold drink, and Max curled up at his feet. Instead, he found blood on the porch, Max limping, whimpering, his right ear torn open. Jack didn't even think. He stormed across the street like a thundercloud in boots, fists clenched. He banged on Harold's door with the side of his fist. It was answered slowly, like Harold knew what was coming and didn't care. The man stood in a stained undershirt, holding a drink, cigarette dangling from his lips. I didn't touch your damn dog, Harold spat before Jack even spoke. He's bleeding. Jack shouted. You've been throwing stuff at him for weeks. He didn't go near your yard. He's a mutt. And he was on my side of the fence. Jack stepped forward, voice shaking. You ever hit him again, You'll what? Harold said, smiling. Kill me. That was the moment. The words hung in the air like a prophecy, spoken by the wrong man at the wrong time. There were no punches. No blood. Just rage, sharp and electric. Jack turned and walked away. He didn't slam the door. He didn't break anything. He just went home. But in a town that didn't know him, didn't care to, none of that mattered. Later that night, the cops came banging. Blue lights danced through the windows of Jack's living room as he sat on the floor with Max, holding a warm cloth to his dog's injured ear. When he opened the door, they tackled him before he could say a word. You think I killed him? Jack yelled as they shoved his face into the carpet. Harold Finch is dead, the officer said. And you're under arrest for murder. The evidence, they said, was substantial. A neighbor across the street had seen Jack go into Harold's house earlier that evening. No one saw him leave. The time of death was estimated around 9:30 p.m., half an hour after the confrontation. Jack's fingerprints were on Harold's front door handle, because he'd touched it during the argument. The blood on Jack's sleeve? Animal. But it was never tested before trial. Harold's head injury was blunt force trauma, consistent with something like a crowbar or tire iron. Nothing was ever recovered. They didn't even search Jack's house until a week later. By then, the garage had been cleaned. And then there was motive. Jack had been heard yelling. He was angry. Alone. They painted a picture of a ticking time bomb. A recluse with no emotional ties except for a dog, one he might have killed for. No one mentioned the fact that Jack had no history of violence. No one mentioned that Harold had multiple complaints filed against him, including for assault and threats. Because they'd all been resolved informally. Jack's court-appointed attorney, Robert Levin, was a worn-out man with bags under his eyes and a mountain of cases on his desk. He asked for no forensic retesting. He didn't challenge the prosecution's expert witness. He didn't cross-examine the neighbor who saw Jack go inside, even though that same neighbor admitted she never saw him come out. We don't want to drag this out, Levin had told Jack. The state's offering life without parole if you plead. I didn't kill him, Jack had replied. I won't say I did. Levin sighed. Then we go to trial. But I'm telling you now, it's a risk. People hate dog lovers who snap. Jack had laughed bitterly. They loved dogs enough to hang me for protecting mine. The trial was a blur. 6 days. That's all it took. The prosecutor, Brenda Halcombe, was young, charismatic, and ruthless. She smiled when she spoke and called Jack calculating and unhinged. Her theory was simple. Jack confronted Harold in anger and beat him to death with a blunt object before calmly returning home. She showed the jury photos of Max's injuries. Told them how dogs often reflect the temperament of their owners. She called it projection. Jack wasn't just a grieving pet owner, he was a man pushed to the edge, she claimed, by isolation and obsession. When Jack tried to testify, he wasn't polished. He stammered. Got angry. Said the system didn't care about poor people or dogs. The jury didn't see a man mourning a dog. They saw a killer trying to justify the kill. After the guilty verdict, Jack was moved to Death Watch, an isolated cell in the far wing of the prison, away from general population. No TV. No phone. Only a clock with no hands and guards who never made eye contact. His appeals came and went. Every few years, a different attorney filed the same paperwork, argued the same points. Procedural errors. Inadequate counsel. No new evidence. All denied. They said there was no reason to believe the trial had been unfair. Jack stopped writing letters after the 5th year. Stopped hoping after the 7th. But he never stopped thinking about Max. The one thing he never let go of was that last moment with him. The warmth of his fur. The look in his eyes that night, the confusion, the pain, the silent plea. "I should have protected you better," Jack whispered once, to no one. "I should have done something." And when the time came to request his last meal, his last phone call, his last anything, he asked to see Max. Not because he believed it would be granted, but because it was the only thing that ever made sense. It's funny how time works in prison. The minutes stretch like rubber bands, snapping back and forth with every hour that passes. But when you're counting days, weeks, months, waiting for the inevitable, it all blurs into one long, suffocating haze. The calendar on the wall has no meaning. Every day is the same. It's not that you don't care anymore, it's just that caring feels like a weight too heavy to carry. And so Jack waited. When his request to see Max went public, Jack didn't expect miracles. He didn't expect the guards to knock on his cell door and say, "It's time to see your dog." That wasn't how the system worked. Not even close. But somehow, somewhere, it started to shift. His request was granted. A petition filed by an animal rights lawyer in Amarillo, a small-town rescue worker with a soft spot for old dogs, had reached the governor's desk. The details were fuzzy. Nothing ever came in concrete form, but Jack had gotten what he asked for. Or at least, a shot at it. The day Max was brought into the prison compound, it wasn't a fanfare. It wasn't a parade. There were no journalists, no cameras, no flashing lights. There was just a van in the distance and a set of security guards standing at attention. The kind of men who had been working the yard long enough to look indifferent to anything human, much less a dying dog and the man who was about to be executed. Jack had been in his cell when they told him. It was just past dawn, a sliver of light slipping through the narrow window above his cot. He sat up at the guard's command, his heart thudding against his ribs. "You'll get 1 hour," the guard said, glancing at the paperwork in his hands. "No touching. No pictures." Jack nodded, though it barely made sense. He could hardly believe it was real. Was it even possible to see Max after all these years? Could time be kind enough to grant him this moment, the one thing he'd wished for since the day they took his dog away? As they led him through the familiar hallways, each corner of the prison as cold and gray as his own soul, Jack couldn't stop the nerves that were crawling up his throat. What if Max didn't recognize him? What if he was old and sick, too far gone to even acknowledge his face? He was about to lose everything. And yet, in that moment, all he wanted was to know if Max remembered him. Just one final moment. A goodbye, something real, something human before they pulled the lever. The visitation room was smaller than Jack remembered, but his mind had always been sharp when it came to Max. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and there was the usual smell, sterile, like old paper and disinfectant. The walls seemed to close in on him as he sat down in the chair, his hands cuffed to the table. And then he heard it. The faint padding of paws, the jingle of a collar. Jack's chest tightened. He looked up. Max stood at the door, a bit slower than he used to be, but still there. The black and white fur had faded to gray, and the once alert eyes seemed clouded, but when those eyes locked on Jack, something stirred deep inside him. The dog's tail gave a half-hearted wag, and Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. Max. For a moment, time stopped. Jack forgot about the guards, the cameras, the ticking clock. All that existed was the dog in front of him, the dog who had been with him through everything. The dog who never judged, who never betrayed. Max limped toward him slowly, his body stiff, but his spirit was undeniable. The dog let out a soft whine, and Jack felt a tear slip down his cheek before he could stop it. He tried to speak, but his voice was cracked, broken. "Hey, boy," he whispered hoarsely, his voice unsteady. "It's me, Max. It's me." Max stopped a few feet away, his eyes searching Jack's face as if trying to piece together the puzzle of who this man was. But Jack could see it, the recognition, the glimmer of memory that flooded those aging eyes. Max's ears twitched, his tail gave another weak wag. Jack smiled weakly, his heart aching. "I never wanted to leave you," he said softly, words meant for himself as much as for the dog. "I'm sorry." The guard stood by, silent but vigilant, watching the reunion with detached indifference. No touching, no comforting. Just a man and his dog, facing an hour that would change everything. Max let out a low, rasping bark, one that Jack hadn't heard in years. It was the same bark, the same sound that had once echoed through the old house. The sound that had chased away the darkness. Jack's chest heaved with a mix of grief and joy. He couldn't touch Max, couldn't even stand up to kneel beside him. He was a prisoner, after all. He wasn't allowed that simple human connection. But for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel like a murderer. He didn't feel like a statistic. He was just a man, in a room with the one thing that had ever truly loved him. Max. For the next hour, they shared silence. Jack sat there, eyes fixed on Max, watching the dog nuzzle the edge of the table, his breath coming in slow, measured pants. He didn't ask for more. He didn't want anything except to see Max. His loyal companion, the one thing that had anchored him through the worst years of his life. And for that hour, the world outside that visitation room didn't exist. The guards eventually cleared their throats, signaling that time was running out. Jack's heart lurched. He stood up, slowly, and Max followed him with those tired eyes. "I love you, boy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I always have. And I always will." The dog's eyes seemed to soften, and Jack knew. Somehow, he knew. When the hour was over, the guards came in, leading Max out of the room. Jack stayed seated, his heart heavy with a weight he hadn't expected. They didn't need to tell him that Max was leaving, Jack knew. He had one moment of peace, one moment of clarity before it all ended. The door clicked shut behind him. And for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel entirely empty. The days leading up to the execution were the hardest for Jack. There was something eerily final about the ticking of the clock in his cell, the constant reminder that the end was near. Even when the guards brought in his last meal, even when the final paperwork was processed, there was still a part of him that couldn't quite accept it. How could he? When they offered him the standard choices, steak, mashed potatoes, an apple pie, a drink, he'd ask for something simple. A hamburger. Just a hamburger. Nothing more. The officers, with their tired eyes and indifferent faces, had taken the request down without question. Jack didn't want anything fancy. It was just food. The last meal wouldn't make a difference. Nothing would. They had been giving him the usual speech for days now. The "you'll be escorted to the chamber soon" speech, the "don't cause trouble" speech, the "any final words" speech. They all seemed to blend into one long, monotonous drone that Jack tuned out. He didn't need the speeches. He needed answers. He needed the truth. But the truth was something he couldn't change. He could never take back the night Harold Finch died. No matter how many petitions were filed, no matter how many lawyers took on his case, it wouldn't bring him the justice he was promised. In the hours before the execution, Jack did what he had done best for the past decade, he thought. He thought about Max. He thought about that last moment, the way his dog had looked at him, like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. The only thing he had left. Max had always been there for him, from the very beginning. They had saved each other in ways that no one else could understand. When Jack first got him, he was just a pup, a little ball of fur with an unstoppable need to explore the world. Jack had been an isolated man back then, working odd jobs, bouncing from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to make a real connection. It wasn't until Max came into his life that he had felt like something mattered. The dog had been his companion, his protector. His family. But that night, everything had shattered. When Harold had threatened Max, when the argument had escalated, Jack's entire world had broken apart. It wasn't just that Harold was dead, it was that Jack had lost something more important than his freedom. He had lost his own sense of who he was. The man who stood trial for murder wasn't the same man who had walked into Harold's house that night. That man had been angry. But the man facing the execution chamber now wasn't angry. He was empty. And it wasn't fair. None of it was fair. There was a knock at the door, sharp and clear. Jack didn't look up. He knew what was coming. "Time's up, Turner," the guard said, voice impassive. Jack stood slowly, his knees creaking from the years of confinement. His body was worn down, stiff from the long stretches of nothingness. The guard didn't wait for him to respond. He unlocked the door, stepping aside to allow Jack to shuffle out. They didn't let him wear his shoes. Only the orange jumpsuit and the cold metal cuffs. They never cared about the little things, the things that made a man feel human. But Jack didn't care anymore. His feet barely touched the ground as he was led down the long, sterile hallway. He didn't resist. He couldn't resist. At the end of the hallway was the death chamber. The heavy door loomed in front of him, its silence deafening. Jack had seen it before, countless times, in the countless years he had been here. He'd watched others walk through those doors, heard their final words. And he had always thought that, somehow, he would never be in that position. Not him. Not the man who only wanted to protect his dog. But now, here he was. Standing in the same spot as every other condemned man who had ever come before him. They told him to sit. They told him to relax. But Jack couldn't. His heart was a drumbeat in his chest, loud and incessant. The straps were pulled tight around his arms, around his legs, his chest. They asked him again if he had any last words. "Yeah," Jack said hoarsely, his voice breaking. "I do." They waited. The clock on the wall continued its steady ticking, like time itself was mocking him. Jack's breath hitched as he closed his eyes, trying to block out the sterile, suffocating smell of the room. It felt too clean, too controlled. Everything was too final. The whole system worked like clockwork. But it was broken, wasn't it? It had all been broken from the start. "Do you know what I've learned?" Jack said, his voice shaking but loud enough to be heard. "I learned that the truth doesn't matter. Not here. Not in a place like this. And I learned that people will always believe what they want to believe. But I didn't kill Harold Finch. I didn't. All I did was try to protect the one thing that mattered in my life. My dog." He paused, glancing up at the sterile lights above him. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Max never gave up on me. And I never gave up on him," Jack continued, his voice cracking. "And if there's any justice in this world, I'd trade my life for his any day." The silence that followed was deafening. Jack stared straight ahead, not looking at the witnesses behind the glass. He didn't care about their judgment anymore. He didn't care about the system. All he cared about was Max, and maybe, just maybe, the hope that somewhere, somehow, his dog still remembered him. Then they began. The chemicals. The cold sting as they entered his veins. Jack's heart hammered in his chest. He tried to hold on to his last thought, the thought of Max, before everything went dark. It was a peaceful darkness, a quiet kind of surrender. And for the first time in years, Jack felt himself release. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't bitter. He was just, gone. But as the needle pierced his skin, something changed. The world around him twisted. The air was suddenly thick with confusion. Jack's heartbeat faltered, then steadied. A strange sound, almost like a dog's bark, echoed in his ears. Jack had expected death to be like everything he had read about. Slow. Inevitable. Unbearable. But what came next was not what he imagined. Not even close. He wasn't dead. He should have been, but he wasn't. At first, it was just a strange, hollow feeling. His limbs felt heavy, sluggish, like he was underwater. He tried to move, tried to open his eyes, but everything felt wrong. He was floating. But not in the peaceful, drifting way he'd always imagined death to be. No, this felt like being pulled, dragged even, somewhere he didn't want to go. Then came the voices. Faint at first, like a distant murmur. But then louder, sharper, as if the world around him was shifting. "Is he?" one voice said. "No, he's still alive," another answered. Alive? But how? He had just felt the chemicals running through his veins. He had been so sure it was the end. So sure. He blinked, but nothing happened. The voices were growing more frantic now, more anxious. Panic. He could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. He tried to speak, tried to scream, but no sound came. He was trapped in his own body, unable to break free, unable to communicate. His chest felt tight. His heart was still pounding. Was it a trick? Was it some cruel mistake? Then, in a sudden burst of clarity, Jack's eyes snapped open. Everything around him was white. Blinding white. He could barely make out the figures moving around him, their faces obscured by the bright light. The voices grew louder still. What the hell is going on? Why isn't he dead? He's supposed to be dead. The dosage was right, wasn't it? One of the figures leaned over him, their face coming into focus. It was a doctor, or at least, someone who looked like one. Their face was pale, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had been expecting a corpse. Not a breathing man. Jack's breath came in short, panicked gasps. His body was still strapped to a gurney, his arms tied down. He could feel the restraints cutting into his skin. He could feel the blood pumping in his veins. He was alive. Alive. The shock of it hit him like a ton of bricks. He had expected to die, had accepted it, and yet here he was, still breathing, still existing in a world that had already moved on without him. He struggled to move his limbs, his muscles stiff from the lack of use. His hands, still bound to the table, trembled uncontrollably. The doctor's voice was sharp, urgent. "Get him to the OR. Now. He's in critical condition." Critical? What the hell was happening? The words made no sense to him, not with everything that had just transpired. Had the execution been a mistake? Was it a malfunction in the chemicals? The figures around him scrambled, their voices a blur of panic. He felt himself being lifted, moved, his body yanked and tugged as though he were nothing more than a doll in their hands. The world was spinning, the bright white light blurring into a mess of shapes and colors. He could hear the sound of footsteps, doors opening and closing, machines beeping in a steady rhythm. And then, a thought pierced through the haze of confusion. Max. His dog. Was Max okay? Had they found him? Was the dog still alive? He hadn't been able to stop thinking about him, about that last moment, about what he had said. Could it be? Was this a second chance? Was this fate, or some twisted cosmic joke? His chest tightened again, but not from fear, this time, it was something else. Hope. The kind of hope he hadn't felt in years. They were moving fast now, too fast for him to fully comprehend. There were sounds of machines being wheeled into place, oxygen being hooked up to him. The doctor's voice was a blur of medical jargon. But Jack couldn't focus on any of that. All he could think about was how he was still alive. And what would happen next? Somehow, time passed. But to Jack, it was like an eternity. The world around him was a whirlwind of faces and voices, blurry, distant, but they all had one thing in common: confusion. Finally, after what felt like hours, he found himself lying flat in a sterile room. His body felt like it was floating, his limbs still heavy and uncooperative. He wanted to sit up, to speak, to do anything, but he couldn't. He was trapped. Trapped in a body that had no energy, no strength to move. His mind raced. What was going on? Why hadn't he died? As his senses returned, he realized something that made his stomach churn. He wasn't alone. There was a figure standing at the edge of his bed. He couldn't make out their face, but he could feel their presence. It was as though the person was waiting, watching, almost as if they knew something he didn't. The figure spoke softly, their voice calm and measured. "You should be dead, Jack." The word sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't answer, couldn't even speak, but his mind raced. Who was this person? Why did they sound so certain? "You're not supposed to be here. But we need you." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The figure didn't sound like they were talking about survival, they sounded like they were talking about something else. Something more. Jack blinked, trying to clear his vision. He felt disoriented, lost in the surreal reality of the situation. What did they mean? Why wasn't he dead? Who was this person? The figure stepped closer, their face slowly becoming clearer in the dim light. Jack's eyes widened. It was a woman. She was familiar, he knew her, but from where? Her voice, calm and chilling, broke the silence. "This isn't the end, Jack. Not for you. Not yet." The world around Jack began to spin again. He didn't know who this woman was, but there was something in her voice, in the way she stood there, that made him feel like his life had just taken another, even stranger turn. Was this a second chance? Or something else entirely? Before he could ask another question, the woman turned and walked out of the room, leaving Jack alone with his thoughts and 1,000 new questions. Jack stared at the empty space where the woman had just stood. The cold fluorescent lights above buzzed quietly, and the hum of machines nearby filled the silence that settled over the room like dust. She was gone. But her words weren't. "This isn't the end, Jack. Not for you. Not yet." He was alive. Somehow, against every rule, every law, every expectation, he was still here. He could feel his breath, shallow but steady. His hands, though weak, were his. His heart, though bruised, still beat. And something was different. Something had shifted. The door across the sterile white room hissed open. Jack flinched. He hadn't heard footsteps. The man who entered didn't wear a guard uniform or a doctor's coat. He looked like he belonged in a courtroom, slick gray suit, polished shoes, a face that knew how to smile without meaning it. "Mr. Turner," he said, flipping open a manila folder. "I'm Alan Becker. I represent the state." Jack didn't answer. He couldn't, not yet. His throat was dry, his body still not fully awake. Becker stepped closer, calm and composed, like he did this every day. "Let me start by saying this isn't a dream, and it's not a mistake. What happened in the chamber, that's going to raise some questions. For now, we're trying to manage the narrative." Jack coughed, his voice hoarse. "Narrative?" Becker nodded. "There's a protocol for this. Technically, the execution was carried out. But you didn't die. Which means the state has a problem. You're alive, and there's no legal precedent for a second execution attempt in this situation. Some might call it divine intervention. Others will call it a procedural error. Either way, you're off the table. For now." Jack blinked. Did he just say, "off the table"? Becker leaned in slightly. "As far as the state's concerned, you're in legal limbo. You're not dead, but you're not exactly free either. The courts are going to fight over this, trust me. But until then, you're being transferred. Transferred? Jack croaked. To where? Becker closed the folder. Somewhere, less public. Within 2 hours, Jack was in a van, his wrists shackled, his heart pounding harder with each mile. No one spoke during the ride. The windows were blacked out. There were no highway signs, no landmarks. Just silence and road. When they finally stopped, the air smelled different, cleaner. Fresher. He was led into a building that felt more like a hospital than a prison. Polished floors, white walls, cameras in every corner. But no bars. No cells. Inside, a woman stood waiting. Not the one from earlier. This one wore a badge and held a tablet. She looked like a therapist, or maybe a federal agent. Jack Turner, she said, tapping something on her screen. Welcome to Pendleton Rehabilitation and Evaluation Facility. You're part of something new. He stared at her blankly. New. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're what we call a unique status case. USC. You legally died on record, but survived. That means we can't just put you back into general population. We can't retry you. And unless we want a media circus, we sure as hell can't release you, yet. She stepped aside, motioning toward a set of double doors. You're here to be studied. Watched. Evaluated. And if the board finds anomalies, well, that could change everything. Inside the doors was something that looked like a small apartment. A bed, a table, even a bookshelf. A television screen mounted to the wall played static until a guard switched it off. You'll have supervised freedom here, she explained. We'll monitor your physical and mental health. Your behavior. Your choices. Jack's stomach twisted. Why? She turned, her face suddenly solemn. Because no one survives what you survived. You were pronounced dead, Jack. There was no pulse. No brain activity. You should have been gone. He didn't respond. Because what was there to say? She added, and then there's the matter of your dog. Jack's eyes shot up. She continued. Max. He's been retrieved from the shelter and is being transported here. You'll see him soon. Jack could barely speak. His voice cracked. Why would they allow that? Because someone powerful pulled strings. Someone wants you watched closely, Jack. And your dog might be part of the reason you're still alive. Hours passed. Jack sat on the edge of his new bed, staring at the door. And then it opened. He didn't breathe. Max hobbled in, his old legs unsteady, but his nose twitching. The moment his eyes found Jack, the dog let out a sound Jack hadn't heard in years, a joyful, wounded cry, and rushed forward. Jack fell to his knees. Max barreled into him. And for a moment, the world disappeared. There was no death row, no execution, no cold table. Just man and dog. Jack buried his face in Max's fur. He was trembling. So was Max. I thought I lost you, Jack whispered. I thought I was gone. Max licked his cheek, then nudged his head under Jack's arm, settling against his chest like he'd never left. In that moment, Jack knew one thing for certain, something bigger was happening. He wasn't supposed to be alive. But he was. And Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was a key to something Jack didn't understand yet. But he would. He had to. Jack sat cross-legged on the soft, government-issued rug, Max resting quietly beside him. The room was quiet now, too quiet, like the air itself was waiting. Max's body was heavier than it used to be, his breathing slower, but his eyes still had that quiet intelligence, that spark of recognition that made him more than a pet. He wasn't just a dog anymore. Jack felt it. They had tried to break him, first with years of solitude, then with death. But Max being here, alive, breathing the same air. That meant something. Max had always meant something. The first night in Pendleton was almost silent. No loud guards yelling down corridors. No prisoners. Just Jack, Max, and the humming of hidden surveillance cameras. The walls were too white, too clean. A place pretending to be a sanctuary, but it felt more like a testing ground. And Jack could feel it. They weren't just watching, they were waiting. The next morning, a knock on the door pulled Jack from a restless sleep. The same woman from before entered, this time with a folder in her hand. Her name tag now visible, Dr. Elise Banner. Behavioral specialist. She smiled faintly. You slept with the dog next to you, she noted. Jack sat up. Yeah. So. It's just, interesting, she replied, flipping through a few pages. You've been through trauma. Legally declared dead. Your vitals were flatlined. Yet you've made a full physical recovery in record time. And Max, well, he's responding to you in a way that's unique. Jack frowned. He's my dog. Yes, Dr. Banner nodded. But dogs don't usually retain emotional memory that long, especially after long separations. Not like this. He reacted to you like he never left. Jack was tired of her tone, clinical, distant. Maybe because I didn't stop loving him. She paused, tapping her pen against the folder. Tell me what happened the night Harold Finch died. But not what you told the court. Tell me what Max saw. Jack's breath caught. What Max saw. Dr. Banner sat down, folding one leg over the other. We believe there may be more to the story than what was entered into evidence. Something, missing. Jack looked down at Max, who now rested his head on Jack's knee. Yeah, he said quietly. There's a lot missing. Jack took a deep breath. For years, he'd carried this version of the truth, the courtroom truth. The facts that had been twisted, trimmed, reshaped to fit a narrative that sent him to death row. But the real story? He'd never told it in full. It was about the land, Jack said. Harold didn't just hate dogs. He hated that I didn't sell him my part of the property. Dr. Banner scribbled something. He wanted full control of the backwoods area. I never knew why. He said he wanted to build on it, but that never made sense. There was nothing out there but trees and silence. Jack looked at Max, who hadn't moved. But then Max started acting weird. Pacing at night. Growling at corners of the house. Refusing to walk near the shed. Dr. Banner leaned in. You think he saw something? Jack nodded slowly. Yeah. I didn't at first. But then one night, Max wouldn't stop barking. I went out, found the shed door open. Harold was inside. With a shovel. Digging. Digging for what? I don't know, Jack said, voice low. But he looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be there. Like I saw something I wasn't supposed to. We argued. He said I was trespassing. On my own land. Jack's fists clenched. Then he grabbed Max. Said he was going to shoot him. Said he'd buried bigger things before. Dr. Banner stopped writing. And then, something happened. I blacked out for a second. Next thing I know, Harold's on the ground. Head split open on the corner of a toolbox. I didn't even touch him. But the cops didn't believe that. Jack swallowed hard. They said I beat him. Said I snapped. But I know I didn't. I swear on my life, I never touched him. The room fell silent. Dr. Banner's voice softened. Why didn't you say any of this at trial? Because they already decided, Jack said bitterly. The jury, the judge, the town. I was a troubled vet with a temper. And Max? Just a dangerous animal. No one wanted the truth. She looked down at her notes, thinking. Then, you believe Harold was hiding something. And Max knew it. Jack looked her straight in the eye. I don't think. I know. After Dr. Banner left, Jack stared at the ceiling for a long time. The shed. The digging. The things Harold had said. I've buried bigger things before. That wasn't just a metaphor. He meant it. And now, that shed was gone. Bulldozed. Part of the investigation, they'd said. But someone knew. Someone still wanted him quiet. And yet, he was still here. Alive. Because of Max. Jack glanced down. The old dog was still watching the door. Like he was waiting for something. Or someone. Later that night, the screen on Jack's wall lit up. A silent notification blinked on it, session ready, file 12-08, K9 cognitive response, subject Max. Confused, Jack tapped the screen. What he saw made his skin crawl. It was video footage. Grainy, black and white, like security camera film. It showed Max. Not in Pendleton. Not even in Jack's old home. But in that shed. Digging. Whining. Scratching at the ground. And then. Max froze. Head lifted. Eyes locked on something behind the camera. The screen cut to black. Jack sat frozen. They had this video. They knew. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. And it was buried. Somewhere deep. Jack couldn't sleep. The image of Max digging in the shed, the abrupt cut to black, the expression on his dog's face, alert, afraid, locked onto something unseen, looped through his mind like a nightmare he couldn't wake from. What did Max see? And more importantly, who was behind that camera? Someone had been filming his property. Someone had kept that footage hidden until now. It wasn't part of his trial. If it had been, things might have gone differently. That tape, proof that Max sensed something, maybe someone, could have shifted everything. So why now? Why show it to him now, after the execution that failed? Jack had more questions than answers, and not a single soul in Pendleton seemed interested in giving him the truth. The staff was polite, distant, professionally warm. Everyone had rehearsed lines. Everyone deflected. Except for Max. He was the only one who never lied. The next morning, Dr. Elise Banner returned, tablet in hand, her demeanor unreadable. "Did you view the session file?" she asked without preamble. Jack leaned forward. "Yeah. I saw it." "Where did it come from?" Elise exhaled, then sat down across from him. "It was found during a routine archival transfer from your trial's evidence database. It wasn't supposed to exist. The date stamp puts it 3 weeks before the incident. But there's no official record of surveillance being set up on your property. No warrant. No police request. No private investigator we can trace. So who filmed it?" She looked him dead in the eye. "That's what we want to find out." Jack narrowed his eyes. "We?" Dr. Banner paused, then pulled up a document on her tablet and turned it toward him. It was a memo, government letterhead, confidential seal, redacted lines everywhere. "Pendleton isn't just a rehab facility," she admitted. "It's a joint project between the Department of Justice and a private firm focused on criminal anomalies, cases that defy explanation. You died, Jack. And then you didn't. That alone flagged your case. But then, your dog started showing up in archived footage. In other cases." Jack blinked. "What?" She nodded slowly. "We found Max on more than one tape. Different towns. Different cameras. All before your conviction. Always near sites tied to violent crime. Always watching. Always, knowing. The room seemed to tilt. You're saying my dog is some kind of, what, omen? I'm saying, she replied carefully, we don't know what he is. But we're beginning to think he's part of something much larger. Something buried a long time ago. Maybe before even you met him. Jack looked at Max, who lay still by the door, head on pause, but alert. Watching. Always watching. Later that day, Jack was escorted to a separate wing of the facility, cold corridors lined with blast-proof doors and camera domes that blinked with life. They stopped at a reinforced door labeled S7, Archive Reconstruction. Inside was a room unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Multiple screens displayed satellite images, maps, faded photos from police case files. A corkboard wall was littered with red string, thumbtacks, and notes scribbled in haste. In the center was a blown-up photo of the shed. His shed. And beneath it, circled in red. Subterranean structure, unregistered, scan date, April 19th. Jack stepped forward. That wasn't there when I lived there. One of the agents, a grizzled man with the calm tone of someone who'd seen too much, replied, because it was buried deep. Lead shielding, camouflage insulation. Someone built it to never be found. Jack stared at the screen. What was in it? The agent glanced at Dr. Banner, who nodded for him to proceed. He tapped a key. A screen zoomed in. Then another file popped up, grainy drone footage of a recovery team digging, slow, methodical, precise. Then the image changed again. What they found wasn't just a hole. It was a vault. Lined with old military-grade steel. And inside? Photos. Blueprints. Names. Surveillance tapes. Stamped with government seals from agencies Jack didn't even know existed. And worst of all. Dogs. Dead ones. Tagged. Labeled. Experiment logs dating back to the 1980s. Jack staggered backward. What the hell is this? Dr. Banner stepped beside him. Harold Finch wasn't just a bitter old man. He was ex-intelligence. Classified assignment. Animal cognition research. He operated off the books for years. Your shed was part of it. You were living over buried secrets you didn't know existed. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. And Max? Project Nimbus 9. Designed to test whether animals, dogs specifically, could detect certain frequencies. Emotions. Lies. Even intent. They trained them to identify people who had killed. Who would kill? Jack stared at her, numb. You're saying. Max was trained to sense death. She nodded. We believe you didn't find Max by accident. We believe he found you. That night, back in his quarters, Jack sat in silence as Max curled at his feet. I always thought you were just a mutt I rescued, Jack murmured, running a hand through Max's fur. But maybe, you rescued me. Max nudged his hand with his nose. You knew, didn't you? Jack whispered. That night. In the shed. You weren't just barking at Harold. You were warning me. He looked down at the dog, who was now looking up at him, not with confusion, or loyalty, or hunger, but with something else. Recognition. Understanding. Like he had always known. Somewhere in the building, an alarm beeped softly. A door locked. A red light blinked in a hallway camera. They were no longer alone in the investigation. Something, or someone, else had taken interest. And the shed wasn't the only thing buried. The truth was just beginning to surface. Jack hadn't slept. Not really. Even with Max beside him, warm, steady, grounding, his thoughts wouldn't stop spiraling. The vault. The buried research. Dogs trained to sense killers. Harold Finch's hidden past. He'd spent years thinking he was a mistake, wrong place, wrong time, a man with a short fuse and bad luck. Now it seemed he was something else entirely. A variable in a long-forgotten experiment. And Max, he wasn't just a loyal dog. He was a witness. A survivor. Maybe even a sentinel. At 6 a.m., Dr. Elise Banner returned. She didn't knock this time. Just entered with purpose. "We need to show you what was in the vault," she said. "All of it." Jack stood slowly, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Why now?" "Because someone tried to scrub the files last night," she replied, eyes grim. "Remote intrusion. Whoever's behind this, they know you're alive. And they're trying to erase the past before you figure out the truth." Jack stiffened. "You think they'll come for Max?" Elise hesitated. "I think they already tried." The secure lab was colder than before. Cleaner, almost eerily so. A faint scent of bleach lingered in the air. Someone had been here overnight. A new technician, young, nervous, typed into a terminal. "We recovered 62% of the archive before the deletion command completed. The rest is fragmented, but some of it salvageable." He pulled up the first file. A report marked Project Nimbus 9, Observational Anomalies, Subject, K992X, Callsign, Max. Jack leaned forward. "That's him." The technician scrolled. Max wasn't just part of the program, he was the last active subject. The others were either terminated or vanished. He was flagged for unsanctioned separation from the handlers after a field op went wrong. Dr. Banner added, he disappeared from the program 6 years ago. The trail ends, just before you found him. Jack exhaled slowly. So he escaped. And found me. Or, she said, he was sent to you. The thought chilled him. They pulled up the next file, fuzzy surveillance footage from a facility marked Redwood Station, Deep OPS Division. Max was younger then. Faster. He moved through the hallways with purpose, unaccompanied. At one point, he stopped at a door. Barked. Pawed at it. Inside that room. A man who would be found dead 24 hours later. A man who had no known enemies. A man who was later revealed to be connected to illegal Black Ops research. Max had identified him before the murder. Before anyone knew. The video ended. The room was silent. Jack stared at the blank screen. "You're telling me my dog was trained to detect people like Finch? People who kill, or will kill?" Dr. Banner nodded slowly. Intent detection. Emotional anticipation. There were theories that certain dogs could identify high-risk individuals before they acted. Max showed early signs of that ability. "But he was just a pup when I found him," Jack muttered. She shrugged. "He could have been reconditioned. Or just waiting. Some believe these dogs choose who they bond with, people like you. People who've lived through war. Trauma. People who walk close to the line." Jack looked down at Max. "Maybe he saw something in me." "Maybe," Dr. Banner said. "Or maybe he was protecting something in you." Later that day, Jack sat with Max outside the main wing. A small fenced courtyard overlooked the tree line. Birds chirped in the distance. It was the first real breath of peace Jack had felt in days. But then, a soft buzz vibrated in Jack's pocket. The tablet they gave him lit up. Unknown message, look under room 3C. Tell no one. His heart pounded. He looked around. No one else in the courtyard. The cameras above hummed quietly. Look under room 3C. He had no idea who sent it, or how they accessed the encrypted system, but the message felt real. Urgent. He leaned down, whispering into Max's ear. "We've got one more place to check." That night, when the halls were dimmed and the facility ran on night staff, Jack slipped from his room. He knew how to move quietly, old habits from his time overseas. Max padded beside him, silent as smoke. Room 3C was in a forgotten wing of Pendleton. A former dormitory, now used for storage. The door was unlocked. Inside, dust danced in beams of emergency lighting. Stacks of old files lined metal shelves. Outdated monitors sat dead on desks. Jack knelt and ran his hand along the baseboards, tapping gently. Then, a hollow thud. He pulled up the edge of a dusty floor panel. Underneath, a small black case. He opened it. Inside were 6 unmarked USB drives, a worn field journal, and a single photo. Max. Standing next to a younger Jack. Except Jack didn't remember the photo being taken. He stared at it in disbelief. The timestamp read, 2013. 2 years before Jack found Max on the roadside. What the hell? He flipped the photo over. One word was written in red marker. Trigger. Jack's hands trembled. The field journal was filled with names, some crossed out, others underlined. Harold Finch was one of them. So was Jack Turner. And next to Jack's name, a scribbled note. Final bond confirmed. Do not intercept. Let the sequence play out. Jack sank to the floor, dizzy. He wasn't just collateral. He was part of it. All along. Behind him, Max growled, low and deep. Jack turned. At the door, a shadow moved. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jack shoved the USB drives into his waistband just as the shadow outside room 3C shifted again. Max stood between him and the door, hackles raised, muscles tense, eyes locked on the hallway. Whoever was coming wasn't a janitor doing rounds. And they weren't here for conversation. Jack slid the photo and journal back into the black case, then gently closed the false floor panel. He'd come back for it, if he got the chance. For now, survival came first. We have to move, Jack whispered. Max didn't need a command. He pivoted silently, pressing against Jack's thigh like a trained partner. The door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, black tactical gear, visor helmet, no identifying marks. Not a Pendleton staffer. Not law enforcement. Jack's gut screamed one thing. Wet work. Without hesitation, Jack grabbed a rusted metal chair and hurled it toward the lights above. Sparks flew as the bulb shattered, plunging the room into partial darkness. Gun raised, the intruder stepped forward, but Max was already airborne. He launched at the figure's knee, teeth bared. A sharp cry. The gun fired, but too late. The shot cracked into the far wall. Jack didn't wait. He dove forward, slamming the assailant into a metal shelf. The two of them crashed into dusty files and overturned monitors. Max spun back, circling, eyes glowing in the dim red light of the emergency exit sign. Jack grabbed the assailant's wrist, twisted, and the pistol clattered to the ground. One punch. Two. The man went limp. Jack yanked off the helmet. The face underneath was unfamiliar, but the tattoo on the neck wasn't. A coiled snake with a triangle eye. Same symbol from the files in the vault, Jack remembered. Whoever this guy worked for, they weren't Pendleton. They were off-book. Rogue. And they knew exactly where to find him. Max whined softly. We gotta go, Jack muttered, grabbing the sidearm and stuffing it into his waistband next to the USBs. He darted into the hallway, dragging the unconscious man inside room 3C and locking the door behind them. The hallway was empty, for now. But sirens were seconds away. Back in the main corridor, Jack ducked low, sticking to shadows. "Max, heal," he whispered. They moved like smoke, gliding past checkpoint doors and security scanners. He had memorized the shift rotations during his sleepless nights. The south exit, used by maintenance, had the lowest surveillance after 2 a.m. It was 2:17. If they made it to the utility tunnel, they could disappear into the forest. At least for a while. But as they neared the last corridor, the lockdown alarms blared. Red lights began flashing. Doors hissed shut. Voices echoed through intercoms. Facility lockdown initiated. Code Black. All personnel report to safe zones. Unauthorized movement will be met with force. Jack sprinted. Behind him, boots thundered across the tile. Max barked, once, short and sharp, then turned and bolted ahead, guiding the way. A side door. Emergency access. Unlocked. They slipped through as heavy footsteps closed in behind them. The tunnel was narrow, concrete, cold. The smell of mildew and old machine oil filled the air. Max led the way. Jack's lungs burned. The pistol was heavy in his hand, the drives pressing into his back. He didn't know where they were going, just that it had to be away. Because now it was clear, Pendleton wasn't a safe house. It was a prison in disguise. And someone had decided Jack Turner had served his purpose. They reached the outer grate. Jack smashed the rusted bolts with a nearby pipe. With a screech, the gate gave way. Outside, the night was thick with fog. Pines loomed in all directions. Freedom smelled like moss and damp dirt and adrenaline. He knelt by Max, panting. "We did it, boy. We're out." Max didn't wag his tail. He just looked up at Jack. Alert. Calm. Like he knew this wasn't a win. Not yet. Miles away, inside the facility, Elise Banner stood in front of a blank monitor. "He's gone," a technician said behind her. She didn't answer. Her hands were clenched at her sides. "He took the drives," the tech added. "All 6. Still, she didn't speak. Then she said quietly, "They were never supposed to activate the kill protocol." "You think it was the snake?" Elise turned. Her eyes were hard. "No. I think the snake is just the start." She picked up a second tablet. One they didn't know Jack had seen yet. It displayed a list of names. Targets. Dates. And a blinking message at the top. Sequence 2, active. In the woods, Jack and Max walked without speaking. Max stopped suddenly. Sniffed the air. Then growled, low, guttural. Jack followed his gaze. Up ahead, a faint orange glow. A cabin? A fire? Something, someone, was waiting in the trees. Max didn't hesitate. He stepped forward. Not afraid. Not confused. But like he'd been here before. Jack followed. The trees whispered in the wind like they knew secrets. Jack's boots crunched against dead pine needles as he followed Max through the thicket. The orange glow ahead pulsed gently, casting soft shadows across the fog. His heart beat loud in his ears. Every survival instinct screamed trap. But Max wasn't hesitating. He was leading. That scared Jack more than anything. Max always knew where to go, but Jack was starting to realize it wasn't random. He wasn't just running. He was returning. The cabin came into full view, a crooked old structure, sagging roof, one busted window boarded with scrap wood. Smoke drifted lazily from a stone chimney. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, except the light was on. Jack crouched behind a tree, eyes scanning for movement. Max sat on his haunches in the open, staring at the cabin like it was a familiar landmark. "Max," Jack whispered, "you've been here before, haven't you?" The dog didn't move. Then he stood. Walked to the door. "Saturday." Waited. Jack stood slowly, heart pounding, gun still tucked at his back. He stepped forward, muscles tight, eyes sharp. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. An old man stood there. Mid-60s, gray beard, heavy denim shirt. One cloudy eye. The other sharp as flint. "I was wondering how long it'd take," the man said. "Get in here before they see the fire." The inside of the cabin was exactly what Jack expected, cluttered, musty, quiet. Maps on the walls. Radios from different decades. A rifle above the fireplace. Cans of food stacked in military-grade crates. And in the corner, a dusty framed photo. Max. A younger Max. And the old man. Jack didn't say anything. He just stared. The man saw where he was looking and gave a short nod. "Yeah. That's him. He was mine once. Before they took him." Jack turned slowly. "Who are you?" The man looked him over, then gestured toward a beat-up chair. "Name's Caldwell. Sergeant Alan Caldwell. Retired, not by choice." "You were part of the program," Jack said. Caldwell grunted. "I was the program. Not the suits, not the lab rats. The field. We trained M. Deployed M. Then watched them get turned into weapons. But Max? He was different. Smarter. Too smart. He figured things out we didn't want figured out." Jack sat, barely breathing. "He found me after I got out." "You're saying that wasn't an accident?" "Nothing about Max is an accident," Caldwell said, crouching down to scratch the dog behind the ear. Max thumped his tail gently, eyes never leaving Jack. "He chose you," Caldwell added. "That's not small. Means he saw something in you. Something worth saving." Jack shook his head. "I wasn't part of anything." Caldwell sighed. "You were. Long before Pendleton. Long before Finch." Caldwell went to a battered file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, dropping it in Jack's lap. Top page. Operation Prometheus, candidate file, Jack Turner. Jack stared. Inside were photos of him from the war. School records. Medical reports. Disciplinary write-ups. Psychological evaluations. He flipped to the last page. A signature. Maxwell, assigned subject match, Turner, J, Tier 1 instinct. "I don't understand," Jack said. "They assigned Max to me?" Caldwell shook his head. "They created Max to find you." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means," Caldwell said, sitting down hard, "you weren't just a random veteran with a record. They knew something about you. Something you hadn't done yet. You were on a watch list years before you met Max." Jack stared at him. Then whispered, "They thought I was going to kill someone." Caldwell nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe they thought you'd be the one to survive something the rest of us couldn't. Doesn't matter anymore. Because now they want it buried." Jack's head spun. His whole life, the guilt, the trials, the cage, it wasn't fate. It was engineered. He looked at Max, "You knew." Max's eyes were steady. Not ashamed. Not afraid. Just present. Unflinching. "Why now?" Jack asked. "Why did the program shut down?" Caldwell rubbed his face. "Because it worked. Too well. Max flagged people in government. Contractors. Deep-pocket donors. It started to unravel. So they pulled the plug. Burned records. Faked deaths. You weren't supposed to survive the injection. Jack blinked. The lethal injection? It wasn't lethal, Caldwell said grimly. It was protocol. A reset. Wipe the last witnesses. You were the final name on their list. Jack stood suddenly. Then why am I still here? Caldwell leaned back in his chair. Because Max pulled you back. Because something in you fought the reset. Jack's voice cracked. And now? Caldwell tossed him a burner phone. Now you run. But not blind. He pointed to the corner of the room. A duffel bag. Inside, gear, passports, cash, and one final file. A new list. More names. At the top. Sequence 2, activation targets. All connected to Finch. All still alive. Jack looked up. What do they want with these people? Caldwell stood, crossed the room, and poured them both a shot of something harsh. They're trying to finish what they started. Jack clenched his fists. Then we don't run. Caldwell smirked. Didn't figure you for the running type. That night, Jack and Max sat outside the cabin, under the stars. The forest was quiet. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the pause before something began. Something big. Jack looked at his old companion. You ready for another war, Max? Max laid his head on Jack's knee. And didn't blink. The cabin's wooden floor creaked under Jack's boots as he paced, the dog-eared folder in his hands. Max lay near the hearth, his eyes tracking every movement. The file was thicker than it looked. Inside were profiles, typed sheets, photographs, some in color, some black and white, and all stamped with the same phrase. Sequence 2, priority termination. There were 9 names. 9 people the program wanted erased. Jack's name had been at the bottom once. But now, he was off the list. Alive. Awake. And very much not done. Caldwell stood by the window, watching the trees. The first name's close. Oregon coast. Used to be one of ours. Handled recovery ops before things went off the rails. Jack scanned the top file. Name, Alicia Wren. Former, Asset Liaison Officer, Redwood Station. Status, disavowed. Flagged, Code Echo. What's Code Echo? Jack asked. Caldwell frowned. Means she disappeared. Went dark before they could silence her. Last ping was 2 months ago. Small fishing town, Lincoln Bay. She might still be there, or bait. Jack closed the file. We won't know unless we go. Caldwell crossed his arms. You realize what this means, right? The second we move, they'll know. They'll track you. They'll track Max. Jack looked at Max, then back at Caldwell. They already are. They left before dawn. Caldwell packed light, military rucksack, encrypted comms, a short-barreled shotgun wrapped in cloth. Jack carried the burner phone, the drives, and the list. Max rode in the back seat of Caldwell's beat-up Jeep, ears perked, alert as ever. As they wound down forest roads and joined the highway, Jack felt the tension coil in his gut. The kind of tension that came before a firefight. Only now, he wasn't walking into battle with a platoon. Just a dog who knew too much. And a mentor who'd been hiding too long. Lincoln Bay was a quiet town of wind-warped wood and boats that had seen better decades. Fog curled through the harbor like smoke, and the gulls didn't even bother calling. The town had that hollow look, where the local diner was also the post office and half the buildings were for rent. They parked near the docks. Caldwell tapped the photo of Alicia Wren. She had a limp. Car bomb, 2014. If she's here, she'll be low profile. Used to use the alias Maggie Clay. Jack glanced around. A bait shop. A weather-worn bar. A marina office. Locals smoked cigarettes like they were currency. Max sniffed the air. Then stiffened. He started walking. Jack followed, hand near the pistol under his coat. They ended up at a used bookshop, tucked between two closed storefronts. Hand-painted sign read, "Second Chances." Max scratched the door once, then sat. Jack opened it slowly. A chime rang overhead. Stacks of old novels and dusty shelves greeted them. The air smelled like paper, ink, and something slightly metallic, like the faint memory of blood. From behind the counter, a woman appeared. Mid-40s. Cropped black hair, lean build, slight limp in her left leg. Her eyes locked with Jack's. Then with Max's. She froze. Max stood. Then wagged his tail once. "You shouldn't be here," she said coldly. Jack stepped forward. "Neither should you." They sat in the back room. Caldwell stood watch by the door, arms crossed. Jack laid the folder on the table. Alicia Wren stared at it. "I burned my file a long time ago." Jack slid it to her. "You didn't burn all of it." She flipped through it in silence. Then looked up. "How did you get this?" "From someone who used to be part of the program," Jack said. "He says you were on the inside. That you saw what they were doing. What they did to the dogs." Her face went still. "I saw worse," she said. "I saw what they did to the handlers. The ones that bonded too well. The ones who didn't follow orders." Jack leaned in. "They're not done. Sequence 2 is live. You're on the list." Alicia laughed bitterly. "Of course I am. I saw the first batch go missing. The accidents. The suicides. They don't let survivors exist." "You want to stay alive?" Jack asked. She met his gaze. "Not if it means running forever." That night, she opened her own safe hidden in the bookshop's floor. Inside were photos, logs, and something Jack hadn't seen before, an old collar with a glowing microchip embedded in the buckle. "Prototype," she said. "Biometric link. The first attempt at syncing a dog's senses to a human's neural network. Max was part of that trial." Caldwell stepped forward. "That tech was banned." "Wasn't about legality," she replied. "It was about control. They wanted to know if emotions could be hijacked, if a dog could act as a compass, a moral override." Jack stared. "You're saying Max can feel what I feel?" "More than that," she said. "He can influence what you feel." Silence. Jack looked at Max, who stared back with the same calm intensity. The kind of look that wasn't just instinct, but memory. Suddenly, Max stood and growled. Low. Deep. Jack moved to the window. Outside, a black SUV. Tinted windows. No plates. Caldwell grabbed his weapon. "It's them." Alicia handed Jack a flash drive. "Take this. It's everything I have. Coordinates. Contacts. Backup caches." Jack stuffed it into his jacket. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off." "You'll die." She smiled. "Not if Max is right about you." They fled through the back alley. Jack didn't look back. But he heard the first gunshot. Then 3 more. Max didn't stop running. Neither did Jack. On the drive out of town, Jack stared at the flash drive in his hand. One more step. One more truth. The list was shrinking. But the storm was only getting started. The motel was the kind of place you didn't ask for ID. Peeling wallpaper, buzzing neon sign, and a front desk clerk who didn't even look up from his TV when Jack paid cash for the room. They parked in the back, under a busted security camera that hadn't worked in years. Inside, Caldwell locked the door. Jack drew the curtains. Max paced by the window, ears perked. Jack dropped onto the bed and plugged Alicia's flash drive into the burner laptop. Directory found. 1. Trigger_protocol.mov. 2. Candidate_tracking.db. 3. Field_logs, classified.txt. He clicked the video file first. It opened with grainy footage from a lab, years old. A white room. 2 people behind glass. A dog. Max. And a soldier, young, angry, restrained. Jack squinted. It was him. The timestamp read 2013. Jack leaned in, heart pounding. A voiceover played. Subject Turner displays increased aggression under sensory deprivation. Introducing Max, 92X into the holding environment. Monitor biometric sync. The video played on. Max entered the room. At first, Jack's younger self flinched. Fists clenched. But then, something happened. He looked at the dog. Max tilted his head. Slowly walked forward. No words were exchanged. But within seconds, Jack's heart rate dropped on the monitor. He sat. Shoulders relaxed. The rage was gone. Synchronization confirmed, the voiceover said. Initiating trigger protocol test. The screen went black. Jack slammed the laptop shut. His hands trembled. He couldn't remember that moment. Not fully. Just flashes. Pain. Noise. Rage. Then calm. I was part of it, he whispered. I was the test. Caldwell sat on the edge of the desk, arms crossed. They weren't just pairing dogs with soldiers. They were using dogs to suppress what they considered combat anomalies. Me, Jack said bitterly. You, and probably a dozen others like you, Caldwell said. They called it behavioral pacification. Trigger protocol was the failsafe. Jack looked at Max. You're my switch. Max didn't move. But something in his eyes. He understood. They opened the next file, candidate_tracking.db. It was a database, geopings, biometric records, time-stamped logs. Each name on the list had a trail. Most were cold. But one wasn't. A man named Derek Shaw. Former trainer. Operative. Last known location, Flagstaff, Arizona. Pinged 3 days ago. The note beside his name made Jack's skin crawl. Final asset handler. Trigger designer. Status, active. Caldwell leaned over his shoulder. He was the one behind the protocol tech. Last I heard, he went private. Ghosted. If he's active, he's either running from the same people, or working for them again. Jack exhaled slowly. Either way, he knows how to end this. Or how to finish it, Caldwell warned. Jack stood. We find him. They hit the road before dawn. Max laid in the back seat, alert, tail still. Jack drove. Caldwell scanned radio bands on an old field scanner, checking for encrypted chatter. They were being watched, they could feel it, but no one had made a move since Lincoln Bay. It was a long drive south, down cracked highways and through vast, empty desert. Jack's mind raced the whole way. Why him? Why Max? Why now? But the closer they got, the more it made sense. Max hadn't just saved his life. He'd redirected it. Flagstaff was dry and hot, the sun hanging heavy in the sky like a searchlight. They tracked the GPS ping to a mechanic's garage on the outskirts of town. Closed sign in the window. No visible security. But Jack knew better, this was a safe house, not a business. Max sniffed the air. Then growled. Jack drew his sidearm and approached the front door. Caldwell flanked him. They knocked once. No answer. Then twice. Still silence. Jack looked at Max. "You're up, partner." Max circled the door, then darted toward the back. They followed, and found the rear entrance slightly open. Too easy. Inside, the place was dark, cluttered with tools and military crates. And in the middle of the room? A body. Sprawled on the floor, eyes wide open, blood dried around the mouth. It was Derek Shaw. Caldwell crouched down. Dead at least 24 hours. No forced entry. No gunshot. Jack pointed. "What's that?" Next to the body, a tablet blinked with a dying battery. They plugged it into their burner laptop. One file. Trigger_release.key. Jack clicked it. It asked for one thing. VoicePrint authentication, Turner, Jack, clearance echo. "What is this?" Jack asked. Caldwell read the screen. "Looks like a master override." "Override for what?" "For you," Caldwell said quietly. Jack hesitated. Then leaned in. "Jack Turner." Clearance echo. A beep. Then a voice played. "If you're hearing this, I'm dead. And they've found you. The trigger protocol we implanted was never meant to be permanent. It was a leash. I hated it. But I built it. They made me. You need to know, Max wasn't just sent to you. He was your only shot at survival. And now, if he's still with you, that means the bond held. Say the phrase below. Out loud. And it ends. No more protocol. No more leash. But if you do, there's no going back." Jack swallowed hard. "Then read the phrase. Maximus Protocol Delta, release." Max twitched. Then looked up. Something in his body shifted. His breath slowed. Then he licked Jack's hand. The screen blinked. Protocol released. Max let out one long, slow breath. And Jack felt something inside him break free. Not pain. Not trauma. Just silence. A silence he hadn't known he'd been carrying. He sank to his knees and held Max close. The dog licked his face once, then rested his head on Jack's shoulder. No chains. No more switches. Just the bond. Pure. Real. Caldwell watched them in silence. Then turned toward the front door. "We just kicked the hornet's nest, kid." Jack stood, fire in his eyes. "Let them come." They didn't wait for the storm to come. They drove straight into it. After the override, Max changed. Not in how he moved, his steps were still precise, his eyes sharp, but in how he connected. It was like a channel between him and Jack had been unblocked. He no longer needed to read Jack's body language. He felt him. When Jack's pulse quickened, Max tensed. When Jack exhaled relief, Max's tail flicked. The bond wasn't just operational anymore, it was organic. And that terrified Jack more than the silence he'd lived in for years. They drove east. Caldwell had spotted a line of old relay stations listed in Alicia Wren's documents, underground hubs used for message drops between handlers, and one of them had gone active just 2 hours before they found Shaw dead. Fort Carson, Colorado. It was probably a trap. But everything was now. The drive was long, but quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a moment that changed everything. Jack finally broke it. "You ever feel like none of this is real?" Caldwell didn't look over. Real doesn't wait for you to believe in it, kid. It just keeps happening. Jack gave a dry chuckle. That's helpful. Good, Caldwell replied. Hate being helpful. Max huffed softly from the back seat, almost like a laugh. For a second, just a second, it felt like family. Broken, bruised, hunted. But family. They reached Fort Carson under a curtain of clouds, the sky smeared in dusk. The facility was supposedly decommissioned, surrounded by chain-link fencing, security cameras too old to power on. Supposedly. Jack climbed the fence first. Caldwell covered him from behind with a scoped rifle. Max scaled it in a way that defied everything Jack understood about dogs. Quiet. Fluid. Practiced. They found the service tunnel entrance half buried under ivy and pine needles. Caldwell scanned it with a Geiger counter-looking device. Clear, he muttered. No trip sensors. Which means they want us to come in, Jack finished. Caldwell grinned grimly. Yup. The tunnel was cold and smelled like wet copper. Old rust clung to the walls. They moved silently, Caldwell sweeping corners, Jack trailing close behind with Max on point. They reached a bulkhead door. Jack typed in the code from Alicia's files. Beep. Access granted. Inside was a war room. Dead monitors. Filing cabinets. A metal table covered in maps. And a single blinking light in the corner. A motion sensor. We're not alone, Caldwell whispered. Max growled, just once. And then the lights cut out. Gunfire shattered the silence. Jack dove to the floor. Caldwell rolled left, returning fire from the hip. A round exploded into the ceiling just above Jack's head. Dust rained down. Max lunged into the dark, a flash of motion. A scream followed. Then silence. Jack activated his flashlight, red beam slicing through smoke. 3 bodies. 2 unconscious. 1 groaning, clutching a bleeding leg. Jack dragged the wounded one to the table and pressed a boot to his chest. You've got 5 seconds, he growled. Who sent you? The man spat blood. You're too late. The chain's already moving. Caldwell stepped closer. What chain? The man smiled through broken teeth. Pendleton was just a beta test. Jack pressed harder. Where's the next node? The man's smile faded. They'll kill me. We might, too, Caldwell said. Only difference is, you'll see it coming. He caved. New Mexico. Site Echo, 7. It's where the next asset is stored. Not a dog. Not a person. Something worse. Jack's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The man looked at Max. Then at Jack. You're not the only one who got paired. They left him breathing but bleeding. Time wasn't on their side. Jack stared at the map, tracing their route. Max leaned against him, eyes fixed forward. I thought it was just me, Jack whispered. Just us. Caldwell packed up the hard drives from the terminal. That's how they wanted you to feel. Alone. Unique. Makes it easier to control the outcome. But if there are more like me, then we're not just running anymore, Caldwell said. We're trying to stop a program from going fully live. They hit the road again. The dark rolled over the highway like an omen. Jack finally said what had been sitting on his chest since Shaw's bunker. I think Max saved me more than once. Caldwell didn't answer right away. Then. He didn't just save you. He chose you. That's rarer than anything we made in the lab. Jack nodded. Then whispered. Then it's time I chose him back. In the shadows behind them, miles away, a satellite pinged. A feed came online. A woman in a dark room tapped a keyboard. She stared at Jack's face on the monitor. Then whispered. Initiate the fallback. Phase 3 begins now. And below her screen. Subject 12, released from protocol. Subject 07, scheduled for activation. And Max? He stared out the window of the truck. The wind in his fur. And something deeper than instinct pulsing in his chest. New Mexico was dry, wide, and dead quiet. They crossed the state line under cover of night, tires humming across cracked desert highways. The moon was a sliver, barely bright enough to cast shadows, and the land around them felt hollow, like something vital had been pulled out of it years ago and never replaced. Max had been tense since they left Fort Carson. His ears stayed high, nose constantly testing the air. Jack could feel the difference. Not just nerves, recognition. Whatever they were driving toward, Max had been there before. Site Echo 7 wasn't on any map. According to the file Alicia left behind, it was buried inside the shell of an old military fuel depot, abandoned since the late 90s, or so the records claimed. It had been quietly reactivated 3 years ago, under a private defense contractor. Blackridge Systems. Caldwell knew the name. They don't bid. They buy, he said as they pulled off-road, headlights off. Blackridge doesn't answer to Congress. They answer to whoever writes the biggest check. Jack peered through binoculars toward a fenced-off compound lit by a few LED beacons. There were no patrols, no vehicles, just silence. Max stared without blinking. Jack lowered the binoculars. Why do I feel like this place is already empty? Caldwell nodded. Because it is. They cleared it before we got here. Then why is Max acting like something's still inside? They went in on foot, night vision, suppressed weapons, Max on point. The gate was unlocked. No alarms. Inside, the buildings were stripped. No paper, no hard drives, no bodies. Just one thing. A hatch. Embedded in the desert floor behind the largest hangar. Steel, reinforced, sealed tight with an electronic lock. Caldwell popped open a field toolkit and went to work. Jack stood watch, Max pacing in small, calculated circles. Then the lock clicked open. The hatch creaked upward. A staircase disappeared into black. Jack drew his sidearm. Here we go. The stairwell led to a bunker deeper than any of them expected, 5 flights down, at least. The walls changed from concrete to smooth, sterile metal. The lights flickered to life as they descended, motion activated. A corridor opened up, leading into a series of sealed observation rooms. One had been shattered from the inside. Glass on the floor. Restraint straps torn. And blood smeared on the walls, not human. Max growled low. Jack stepped forward. The door to the containment room hung open. Inside was a metal platform, and a video monitor looping a silent feed of the room. Caldwell tapped the terminal. It clicked alive. Subject 07, inactive. Last known response, 43 hours ago. Status, released. Jack swallowed. Subject 07. Another dog? No, Caldwell said. Not a dog. He opened a second file. And Jack saw it. The subject profile. Not a canine. Not a human. Both. Genetically engineered. Programmed. Something spliced together and then trained from birth. Born in the labs. Raised without daylight. It had a name once, Talon. And it had handlers. 8 of them. Only one survived long enough to submit a field report. The report ended with 3 words. No control possible. Caldwell exhaled slowly. They tried to build something smarter. Stronger. Past instincts. No loyalty. No empathy. Just results. Jack whispered, "Why would they do that after Max?" "Because Max resisted," Caldwell said. "They thought loyalty was a weakness." Jack looked at Max. They were wrong. They found one last room at the far end of the corridor. Storage. Inside, rows of empty cages, feeding systems, drug cabinets. And, in the center, a single kennel. Torn open from the inside. Blood on the latch. Jack crouched. Max stood beside him, stiff as iron. Then Jack saw it. Etched in the steel. 12 C's. 7 follows. Caldwell read it over Jack's shoulder. "That's not just a code." Jack stood, breath tight. "It's a warning." They surfaced just before dawn, orange breaking across the desert. Caldwell contacted one of his off-grid relays and uploaded Alicia's data. Then he turned to Jack. "We've got less time than we thought." Jack nodded. "Talon's not going dark. He's not hiding." "No," Caldwell said grimly. "He's hunting." Jack looked down at Max, who was staring toward the horizon. Then back at the hatch. They were the end of one line. And the beginning of something far more dangerous. That night, as they camped in the open desert, Jack couldn't sleep. Not because of the fear. Not even because of Talon. But because of the way Max sat, back straight, eyes fixed north. Like he already knew where they'd be going next. Like he was listening to something Jack couldn't hear. Jack leaned forward and whispered. "What are you hearing, boy?" Max turned his head. And for the first time since the protocol was lifted, Jack felt it. Another mind. Another presence. Far away. Moving closer. Talon wasn't just a weapon. He was the shadow of everything Jack might have become. If he hadn't had Max. The morning sun broke over the New Mexico desert like a jagged knife, and Jack squinted against the harsh light as he scanned the horizon. His gut churned with unease, the kind of feeling you get when you're walking into a storm, but you don't know which direction it's coming from. Max was still staring north. Jack knew better than to ask again. Max wasn't just reacting to something external, there was a connection. Jack could feel it, too, like a magnetic pull from somewhere far away. The weight of it pressed down on his chest. But the air was still. The silence was too thick. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Caldwell was already packing up the gear, not saying much, but Jack could see the unease in the way his hands moved. "Talon's close," Jack said finally, his voice low. Caldwell didn't reply right away. He didn't need to. They all felt it. Max suddenly snapped his head to the side, his fur bristling, his muscles tensing like a coiled spring. It happened so fast. A shot rang out, sharp, ringing in the quiet, followed by the sharp screech of metal grinding against metal. Jack barely had time to react before a figure blurred into view from the distance. A tall, dark shape against the sun, moving with the fluidity of something engineered, not born. Talon. He didn't look human. The first thing Jack noticed were the eyes, no, not eyes, lenses, reflecting the desert light like twin mirrors. And the movements, unnatural. Not a step, not a pause, just a constant flow of motion, fast, calculated, precise. A wolf in human form. Max growled deep in his throat, stepping in front of Jack protectively, though he didn't advance. There was something about Talon that made even him hesitate. "Talon," Jack said, barely above a whisper, knowing full well the creature could hear him. "You're not real." Talon tilted his head, the motion unnervingly familiar, like Max when he was trying to figure out a puzzle. Then he spoke, his voice a low rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am real." Talon's lips didn't move the way a human should, but the words were unmistakable. "I was born in darkness. And now, I hunt in the light. The statement was chilling, a stark reminder that they were dealing with something far beyond anything Jack could have imagined. The first move was so fast, Jack barely saw it. Talon's arm shot out, the mechanical hum of servos audible as he drew a sleek, black weapon from his side. The barrel gleamed in the sunlight before the next shot rang out, this time aimed at Caldwell. But Max was faster. With a speed Jack had only seen once before, Max lunged forward, teeth bared, and collided with Talon's legs, knocking him off balance. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the air as Talon crashed to the ground. For a split second, everything was a blur. Max was already circling, moving with the grace of a predator. But Talon wasn't down for long. He recovered too quickly, rolling to his feet and launching himself into a perfect combat stance. His eyes locked onto Max with a predatory focus. "Talon, stop!" Jack yelled, taking a step forward, but it was too late. Talon's response came with a blur of motion. Max and Talon collided again, their bodies crashing together with a sickening thud. Teeth clashed, claws scraped against metal, and growls filled the air as they struggled for control. Talon was strong, his movements flawless, like every part of him was designed to kill. But Max was fighting for something more. Jack couldn't tear his eyes away as Max fought with everything he had, his loyalty, his bond to Jack, his very soul. Each strike, each bite, was a defiance against what Talon represented. He wasn't just another experiment. He was something that was meant to be torn apart, and yet, he refused. Talon had been bred to kill. Max had been born to love. And then, just as it seemed like Max was losing ground, the most unexpected thing happened. Talon hesitated. It was so brief that Jack almost missed it, an imperceptible falter in Talon's motion, a second of uncertainty in the otherwise flawless aggression. His head jerked to the side, his lenses reflecting something Jack couldn't see. Max didn't waste the opportunity. With a savage growl, Max drove his weight into Talon's side, slamming him to the ground once more. The force of the hit knocked the wind from Talon's chest, and for a moment, he lay still, stunned. But only for a moment. Talon's hand shot up, grabbing Max by the throat with a force that made Jack's blood run cold. For a split second, Max's body was suspended in the air, Talon's grip crushing him. Jack didn't think, he moved. His gun was in his hand before his mind had caught up. Without thinking about the consequences, Jack pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. Talon's head jerked back, the impact sending a shockwave through his body. The grip on Max loosened. Jack didn't stop to see the result, he sprinted forward, yanking Max out of Talon's reach and dragging him behind cover. Talon staggered to his feet, disoriented, but his eyes, those cold, mechanical eyes, locked on Jack. The fury in them was unmistakable. "You can't stop me," Talon rasped, his voice cold and hollow. "You were never meant to." Jack's heart was pounding in his chest, the adrenaline making his hands shake. Max was breathing heavily beside him, his fur matted with blood. But he was alive. And that was all that mattered. Caldwell's voice came over the comms, low and urgent. "We've got company. We need to move. Now." Jack glanced over at Talon, who was already advancing, his body shifting with inhuman precision, the metallic hum of his limbs audible in the tense silence. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. Max's low growl was the only sound that mattered. "We're not running this time," Jack said, his voice steady, his mind clear. "This ends here." The desert seemed to swallow them whole as they sprinted toward the ridge, the sun a molten disk on the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the sand. Jack's breath came in sharp gasps, his heart hammering in his chest as his boots pounded the earth, the dry air burning in his lungs. But it wasn't the heat that made his skin crawl, it was the feeling that Talon was right behind them, like a shadow that never faded. Max stayed close, his body low to the ground, his senses trained, every muscle coiled for the next threat. Jack didn't have to say anything, Max was already on edge, feeling the same tension that was gnawing at him. They had no time to waste. Caldwell was up ahead, pushing through the brush with the same urgency, though his calm demeanor never wavered. He was already tapping into the comms, calling for backup, calling for a way out. The man was a strategist, never panicking, but Jack knew even he felt the weight of the situation. Blackridge's assets were closing in, and the longer they stayed exposed in the open, the less likely they were to make it out in one piece. "Talon's still behind us," Jack panted, glancing back over his shoulder. There was nothing. No movement. But Jack didn't let his guard down. Not for a second. Max's ears perked up, his tail stiff with alertness. He growled low, and Jack's pulse quickened. That growl was a warning. "Caldwell," Jack called out, keeping his voice low but urgent. "How much farther?" Caldwell didn't break his stride. 2 miles, at least. "We need to move faster." 2 miles. The thought of running that far with Talon in pursuit seemed impossible, but Jack had no choice. There was no other way. They pushed forward, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the oppressive silence of the desert. Jack's mind raced. Talon wasn't just some rogue soldier. He was a weapon, something beyond human. And if they didn't get to cover soon, they'd be outmatched, outgunned, and out of time. Max stayed ahead, moving like a shadow, the only sign of his presence the soft rustle of the sand beneath his paws. Jack followed close, his hand never leaving the grip of his sidearm. His eyes darted from side to side, scanning for any sign of danger, every muscle taut, every instinct on high alert. And then, a sound, faint at first, but unmistakable, cracked through the stillness. It was a soft hum. A mechanical hum. Talon. Jack didn't wait. He broke into a sprint, pushing his legs harder, his breath ragged, his entire focus on the path ahead. Max was already in the lead, darting across the uneven ground with the precision of a machine. Jack's heart raced. They had to reach the ridge. The hum grew louder. Talon was closing in, faster than Jack could have predicted. They reached the ridge, a steep incline that led into a narrow canyon where the walls seemed to close in on them. Jack was almost there, but he could feel the heat of pursuit, the presence of something relentless, cold, and determined. Talon wasn't slowing down. Jack could feel it in his bones. He reached for his radio. "Caldwell, I need backup now." But the radio crackled, and then it was dead. They were on their own. Max's growl broke through Jack's thoughts again, fiercer this time. Jack's eyes shot to the ridge above them. The canyon walls offered little cover, and Talon would be on them in moments. Jack's mind raced, calculating their options. And then he saw it. The broken remains of a transport vehicle, an old military jeep, half buried in the sand, its tires deflated, its frame rusting with time. The perfect trap. "Max," Jack whispered, the plan forming in his mind. "Get ready." Max's ears swiveled, and the dog turned his head toward Jack, his eyes meeting his with an understanding that only they shared. Max wasn't just a weapon. He was Jack's companion. And together, they were going to make sure that Talon didn't have the chance to finish what he'd started. As Talon's hum grew louder, Jack moved toward the jeep, crouching low, keeping his profile small. Max followed his lead, his every step calculated and silent. Jack felt his pulse slow as they approached the vehicle. Then, like a switch being flipped, Talon appeared at the edge of the ridge. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. His glowing lenses scanned the landscape, locking onto their position almost instantly. Jack's hand was steady on the trigger. And then it happened. Max launched himself into the air with a ferocity that took Jack's breath away. The dog collided with Talon in midair, the impact sending the two tumbling to the ground in a blur of motion. Talon twisted in midair, his mechanical limbs adjusting for the hit, and they landed with a heavy thud. But Max wasn't giving up. He dug his teeth into Talon's arm, his body a flurry of muscle and fur as he fought with everything he had. Talon snarled, his hands moving to grab Max, but it was too late. Max had already shifted, rolling out of his grip, his teeth snapping at Talon's exposed neck. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the canyon, and Talon's body jerked as the bullet hit him in the shoulder. The creature let out a mechanical growl, his head swiveling to face Jack with a look of cold, unwavering hate. It didn't stop him. Talon was already adjusting, recalibrating, like the shot had barely fazed him. Max was still locked in combat with him, his growls fierce as he tried to land another blow. Jack fired again. This time, the shot hit its mark. Talon staggered back, his mechanical body sputtering, a faint whine coming from his chest. The beast let out a growl, a low, primal sound, as he stumbled. Jack didn't know how much longer they could keep this up. Talon was relentless. But so was Max. For a brief moment, their eyes met, Jack's and Max's. And in that moment, Jack knew. They would win. Together. Talon lunged again, but this time, he was slower. Max was ready. He met him head-on, teeth bared, with all the fury and love he had inside him. And in the canyon, the final battle between man, beast, and machine had begun. The fight was far from over. Max's teeth sank into Talon's exposed arm, and Jack could hear the hiss of servos under the synthetic skin, the way Talon's body responded to the damage, smooth, seamless, unyielding. But Max wasn't backing down. The dog's low growl reverberated through the canyon, a warning, a promise of something far more primal than the machine that stood before them. Talon recoiled, swinging his mechanical arm in an arc that would have sent anyone else flying. But Max was faster. He ducked under the strike, his body low to the ground, his growl never ceasing. Jack's heart raced as he watched the two fight. His dog, his protector, fighting something that shouldn't even be possible. He couldn't tear his eyes away. Max was his last hope, the only thing left that could keep him alive long enough to get out of this hellhole. Talon was no man. He was an experiment, crafted, designed, and molded for one purpose. To kill. And Jack had no doubt that if he didn't stop him soon, Max would be nothing more than a tool for Talon's mission, just like the rest of the broken pieces in the desert. The second shot barely grazed Talon's shoulder, but it wasn't enough to slow him down. The machine-like figure straightened, adjusting itself, its glowing eyes fixed on Jack with a cold, detached fury. "You cannot stop me," Talon growled, his voice coming from a speaker hidden within his chest. It wasn't human, but it carried the weight of death in every syllable. Jack's fingers clenched around the grip of his gun, and he swallowed hard. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finishing what he had started. It was about taking back control, taking back his life, his future with Max. Max's growl rose in pitch, and without warning, the dog let go of Talon's arm, propelling himself backward, his body a blur of movement. Talon's momentary confusion was all the opening they needed. Jack took aim, his mind zeroing in on the one weak spot Talon had exposed, his chest. The place where his heart would have been, had he been human. Jack fired. The bullet hit its mark. Talon staggered back, the impact sending him reeling. For a split second, his glowing eyes dimmed, just long enough for Jack to see a flicker of something almost human. Talon's body trembled, his movement stilted, like the carefully constructed machine was malfunctioning. It was working. Jack could feel it. But there was no time to think. Talon was already recalibrating, his body shifting into a more defensive stance, the hum of his systems rebooting. His chest glowed, a sickly green light flashing from the wound. He was healing. Jack needed more time. Max barked once, sharply, before launching himself at Talon again, this time aiming for the legs. The dog's jaws clamped down on the joints of Talon's lower body, his teeth grinding against the metallic surface. Talon's legs buckled, and the two crashed to the ground in a tangle of fur and wires. Talon roared in frustration, his mechanical limbs flailing, his systems working to regain control. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, his gun raised, moving as fast as he could with the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The gunfire wasn't enough before, but maybe now. Max's bark cut through the air, fierce and commanding. And Jack saw it. Talon had one final vulnerability. There, beneath the armor, beneath the sleek technology, there was something human left. A flicker of weakness, just for a moment, when he thought he had the upper hand. That was all Jack needed. He fired. The bullet found its mark, slamming into Talon's chest with a force that made the machine's entire body shudder. A hiss of steam filled the air as Talon's internal systems faltered, and his movements became sluggish, less precise. Max yelped as Talon's heavy hand swiped at him, but he dodged it, rolling to the side, ready to go in again. Talon let out an unearthly scream, his glowing eyes flashing brighter, then dimming. His body twitched. His limbs jerked like a marionette with tangled strings. And then, finally, he fell. Max stood over him, his chest heaving, his body covered in dirt and sweat. He looked up at Jack, his golden eyes reflecting the same exhaustion, the same relief that Jack felt. But the victory felt hollow. Talon wasn't gone for good. Not yet. There was always more. There were always more. Is it over? Caldwell's voice crackled through the comms, his voice low, tense. We're moving in. You still have time. Jack's hand gripped his gun, his eyes never leaving Talon's still form. It's over for now, he said, his voice hoarse. But this isn't finished. There's more to this. There's always more. Caldwell arrived moments later, his team moving quickly, efficiently. They were here to clean up, to take care of the mess, but Jack knew the real battle wasn't out here in the desert. It was waiting for them. It was coming in ways they hadn't even begun to understand. Max padded toward Jack, sitting beside him, pressing his body against his leg for reassurance. Jack felt the familiar weight of his companion beside him, and for the first time in days, he let himself breathe, let the weight on his chest lift, even if only for a moment. We did it, buddy, Jack whispered, his hand resting on Max's head. He could feel the dog's heartbeat beneath his fingertips, steady, constant. Max was alive. And for now, that was enough. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. And he had a choice to make. The sound of Talon's final moments echoed in Jack's mind as they moved out. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Max was still at his side, but now Jack had to figure out what to do next. There was no turning back. The world was changing, and Jack was about to find out just how much. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in a fading golden light as Jack, Caldwell, and the rest of the team moved quickly through the canyon. The air was thick with the dust kicked up by their boots, the land now eerily silent except for the occasional crackle of comms. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle over him like a thick fog. They had just survived Talon. But surviving one enemy didn't mean the fight was over. If anything, it had only just begun. And as the shadows grew longer, so did the uncertainty that gripped Jack's heart. Caldwell, Jack said, his voice rough from the exertion, where's the backup? We need to get to the extraction point. Now. Caldwell, leading the way, didn't even look back. Extraction point's 2 miles ahead, Jack. We're almost there. But don't relax just yet. This place is crawling with Blackridge's assets. We're not out of the woods. Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the environment. The once quiet, wide-open desert now felt more like a maze, each turn potentially leading to a new threat. Even though Talon was down, there were still so many unknowns: Blackridge, the corporation, their intentions. And now Jack was more certain than ever that they had no idea what they were up against. Max trotted beside Jack, his body low, his eyes flicking from one side to the other, always alert. The dog was still in fighting shape, his senses as sharp as ever. Jack couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for his companion. Max was more than a dog. He was his lifeline, his anchor in a world that was spinning out of control. A crackle broke through the comms, and Caldwell's voice came through, low and tense. "We're getting interference." "Something's wrong." "Interference? What do you mean?" Jack's pulse quickened, his eyes narrowing. They were too close now, too close to safety, to have something go wrong. "I'm not sure yet," Caldwell responded. "Just stay sharp." Jack's instincts were on high alert. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as they continued forward, the sense of danger never leaving him. He'd felt it before, during the first night in the desert, when he thought he was going to die. But now, it was different. Now, it felt more like a trap closing in. And that's when it hit him. The sand. The silence. The lack of any movement from the ridge above them. Jack raised his hand, signaling for the group to stop. The others froze immediately, their attention shifting to him. Caldwell's brow furrowed. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low but filled with urgency. Jack scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing in the dimming light. "We're being watched. I can feel it." The team moved into formation, the atmosphere thick with tension. Everyone had their weapons at the ready, but Jack could tell they were all waiting for the inevitable. And then it happened. A flash of movement on the ridge above. Max was the first to react, his body tensing as his ears flicked. He was on alert, his growl low and guttural, his eyes fixed on the spot where the shadow had disappeared. Jack's pulse spiked. "Caldwell, take cover. We're not alone." But it was too late. A shot rang out from above, the sound piercing the desert air, echoing like a thunderclap. Jack's heart stopped, the world freezing for a fraction of a second. He threw himself to the ground instinctively, his hand covering Max as the dog curled beside him, low to the earth. The bullet missed. Barely. More shots followed, rapid fire, each one kicking up sand and debris as they whizzed past them. The group scattered, taking cover behind rocks, the sharp sound of gunfire reverberating through the canyon. "We're pinned down," someone yelled from the back. Jack's hand clenched around his sidearm, his mind racing. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't afford to get bogged down in a firefight in the open. They had to move. But where? The answer came in the form of a shadow moving quickly across the ridge above them. Jack's eyes locked onto the figure, another soldier, dressed in the familiar black gear of Blackridge, moving with inhuman precision. They were relentless, like the machine that had nearly killed them all. Jack's mind clicked into overdrive. He could barely make out the figure, but he knew this was no ordinary soldier. Whoever this was, they were different. There was a calculated coldness in their movements, an intensity that felt almost like Talon. "Caldwell!" Jack shouted. "Do you have eyes on that ridge? Who's up there?" "Not yet," Caldwell responded, his voice tense. "We need to move, Jack. We're outgunned." Jack didn't hesitate. He grabbed Max by the collar and motioned for the team to follow. "We're taking the high ground. Get to the ridge. We need to take the fight to them." The team nodded, quickly getting into motion, running for the rise in the landscape where they could use the terrain to their advantage. Jack moved quickly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. It felt like everything was happening too fast, too out of control. But he had no choice. If they didn't push back now, they would be overrun. The team reached the base of the ridge, and Jack climbed, his fingers scrambling for purchase on the uneven rocks. Max was right behind him, following with instinctive ease. They reached the top, breathless, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. And then they saw it. A convoy of black rich trucks, parked at the base of the canyon, their engines still running. Soldiers in black gear were moving around them, setting up a perimeter, blocking their escape route. It was a trap. They'd been herded here, surrounded. Jack's mind raced. The team was trapped. The convoy had them cornered. They were outnumbered and outgunned. But Jack wasn't going to give up. Not now. "We fight," he said, his voice steady. "We take them down. We don't stop until we're out of here." Max's tail twitched beside him, his body tensed, ready to move. Jack could see the determination in his dog's eyes. It was the same fire that burned inside him. Together, they could do this. Together, they could survive anything. "Move out," Jack ordered, his voice unwavering. And with that, they charged. The sound of heavy boots pounding the dry earth filled the air as Jack and his team surged forward, guns raised, moving with the kind of urgency only a cornered animal knows. Every step was a gamble, each breath a prayer. The convoy was right below them, and the odds were stacked against them, but Jack wasn't about to back down. Not when they had come this far. Max was at his side, just as determined, his body low to the ground, ready to pounce. The bond between man and dog was more than just loyalty. It was survival. "Stay sharp," Jack barked to the team, his voice cutting through the cacophony of gunfire. "We push forward, no retreat." The first Blackridge soldier caught sight of them from across the convoy and shouted a warning. In an instant, all hell broke loose. A barrage of bullets tore through the air, ripping into the earth and the rocks around them. Jack ducked, barely avoiding a shot that clipped the side of his shoulder. He fired back, his aim steady. One soldier fell, then another, but there were too many of them. The terrain was working against them, there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. The canyon walls were steep, narrow. Their options were limited. They couldn't afford to stay in this firefight for long. Max was in his element, moving with fluid grace, darting between rocks and outcrops, his snarls and growls blending with the sound of gunfire. He was more than a companion. He was Jack's protector. He had been with him through everything, and now he was proving that, more than ever. "Take the high ground," Caldwell shouted, gesturing toward a ledge above them. "We can outflank them from there." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He turned to his team, nodding grimly. "Move out." The group scrambled for the rocks, climbing quickly, their muscles burning with exertion. Jack's shoulder throbbed with pain, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. They needed to get to that ridge, or they were dead. Max was ahead of him, his paws scrambling up the rocks with ease. Jack watched his dog as he made his way to the top, a flash of gold in the dust. When Max reached the ridge, he paused, his head cocked, his nose twitching. He was listening. Jack reached the top just as Max's growl turned into a sharp bark, signaling danger. Jack instinctively crouched down, eyes scanning for movement. He spotted them. A group of Blackridge soldiers were setting up a machine gun, positioned just below the ledge. They had them trapped. There was no way they could get past without being cut down. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. Not now. "We can't stay here," he muttered to himself, his mind racing for a solution. The machine gun was the biggest threat. If they could disable it, they might stand a chance. Max suddenly darted off the ridge, his body moving at a speed that was almost a blur. Jack's eyes widened in surprise. The dog wasn't just acting on instinct. He had a plan. "Max!" Jack yelled, but the dog didn't look back. Max reached the bottom of the ridge in seconds, weaving through the gunfire like a shadow. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the dog made his way to the machine gun nest. The soldiers didn't see him coming. Max was too fast, too quiet. Then, like a flash of lightning, Max lunged at the soldier nearest to the gun. The man barely had time to react before Max sank his teeth into his leg, forcing him to drop the weapon. The other soldiers shouted in panic, scrambling to defend themselves. Jack didn't wait. He fired, taking out one soldier, then another. The rest of the team followed his lead, their shots precise, taking down the remaining soldiers who were scrambling to regroup. But the battle wasn't over. More soldiers were coming from the other side, and Jack could hear the heavy rumble of trucks pulling up behind them. "Caldwell, get that gun out of commission," Jack shouted. "Now." Caldwell nodded, moving quickly to the machine gun nest. He grabbed the nearest soldier's weapon and aimed it at the truck behind them. With a quick burst of fire, the engine of the lead truck exploded in a shower of sparks and flames. The convoy was momentarily stalled, but that wasn't enough. The remaining trucks would be able to move in any second. "We need to move," Jack said, his voice grim. "They'll send reinforcements. We don't have much time." But as Jack turned to lead his team out of the chaos, a loud crack split the air, then another. The first shot hit the rock beside him, sending chunks of stone flying. The second shot landed inches from his leg. He dropped to the ground, instinctively pulling Max closer, shielding him with his body. His mind raced. That shot was too accurate. Too controlled. He knew who it was before he even saw the figure emerge from the smoke. Talon. The figure moved out from the wreckage, stepping into the dim light of the canyon. He was whole, intact, and worse than before. His body was repaired, reinforced, stronger than Jack remembered. "Jack," Talon's voice was like ice. "Did you think you could escape?" Jack felt a chill run through him. The nightmare was back. Max growled low, his hackles raised, but he didn't attack. He wasn't just any dog. He knew this was something bigger. Something worse. "Get back," Jack said, pushing Max behind him. "This ends now." Talon smiled. A cruel, cold, artificial smile. "It doesn't end until I say it does." Jack's blood ran cold as Talon raised his weapon, the glowing red barrel aimed directly at him. Jack had only one chance. The moment Talon's gun fired, the machine would be distracted, momentarily vulnerable. Jack didn't think about the consequences. He moved. With the speed of a man who had nothing left to lose, Jack lunged forward, knocking Talon's weapon aside just as the shot went off. The bullet tore through the rock beside them, and in the same instant, Jack grabbed Talon's arm, twisting it, using his momentum to force the machine to the ground. Max was there, too. As Jack fought to control Talon's flailing limbs, the dog latched onto the machine's throat, tearing into the synthetic skin with ferocity. Talon screamed, an unnatural, garbled noise as sparks flew from his body. But even as Jack struggled with the machine, he could hear the engines of the trucks revving behind them. More Blackridge forces were coming. Now or never. Caldwell shouted, pulling Jack out of the fray. "We need to move, Jack." With one last, desperate push, Jack used all his strength to shove Talon off him. The machine's body twitched, its systems malfunctioning in an explosion of sparks. "Go. Now!" Jack yelled. Caldwell grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the ridge. Max was right behind them, refusing to leave his side. The Blackridge soldiers were closing in, but Jack and his team weren't waiting around. They were fighting for one last chance to escape, one last hope to survive. And Jack wasn't going to stop until they were free. The sky above them was a dull, muted gray, the last vestiges of daylight slipping away as Jack and his team sprinted across the rocky terrain. The sounds of their pursuers, footsteps, engines, the distant crack of gunfire, seemed to chase them, a relentless reminder that the danger wasn't over. Not yet. Max was at Jack's side, panting heavily but still alert, his eyes scanning the horizon. Jack could feel the dog's urgency, his own heart matching the rapid rhythm of his companions. They were so close to the extraction point, but the price of freedom was steep. Caldwell's voice crackled in his earpiece, pulling him from his thoughts. "Jack, you're almost there. We've got a safe zone just ahead. You need to keep moving, or they'll catch up before you make it." "We're not stopping until we're clear," Jack replied, his voice tight with determination. The wind whipped against their faces, carrying with it the scent of dust and the distant burn of gunpowder. Jack's thoughts were racing, each one more desperate than the last. They had taken down Talon, but Blackridge wasn't done. They had been cornered, ambushed at every turn. And now, with the truck still tailing them, the weight of their fate hung heavy in the air. But there was one thing Jack knew: he wasn't going down without a fight. Not today. Not while Max was still by his side. The landscape before them was a patchwork of jagged rock and sparse, thorny bushes, rough, unforgiving terrain. But it was their only way out. The team pushed forward, their muscles aching, their energy drained, but they kept moving. They had no other choice. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder, closer. Jack glanced over his shoulder, spotting the trucks gaining ground. It was only a matter of time before they would be within range of their weapons. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to focus. They had to make it. "Hold up," Caldwell called. "We've got one last obstacle before the extraction point. A ravine up ahead. It's narrow, but it'll slow them down." Jack's gaze darted ahead, where the ravine loomed, cutting through the landscape like an open wound. It was a narrow path, barely wide enough for the trucks, but it would give them a momentary advantage. They had to reach it before Blackridge's forces caught up. "Let's move," Jack said, signaling to the others. "Max, stay close." Max obeyed without hesitation, his fur ruffling in the wind as he trotted beside Jack. The bond between them had always been strong, but now, it was a lifeline. Jack had no idea how long they could outrun the forces chasing them, but he wasn't about to give up. They reached the ravine just as the first truck rounded the corner. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they dove into the narrow pass, the sharp walls of stone rising on either side. The team squeezed through, moving fast, their footsteps echoing off the rocks. Behind them, the trucks followed, their engines growling like predatory beasts. Jack's fingers tightened around his weapon as they pushed deeper into the ravine, hoping they could find a way to slow down their pursuers. And then, without warning, a massive explosion shook the ground. The shockwave hit them like a hammer, throwing Jack off balance. He barely managed to keep his footing, Max's body slamming into his side as the dog barked in alarm. Dust and debris flew through the air, momentarily blinding them. Jack gasped, his heart racing as the world seemed to tremble around him. The explosion had come from behind. One of the trucks. They'd blown it up to block the rest of the convoy. But who had done it? Caldwell? Jack shouted, scanning the dust for any sign of movement. "Keep going." Caldwell's voice came through the comms, strained but clear. "I've got your 6. Just get to the extraction point. We'll handle the rest." Jack didn't need to hear more. He turned to the team, shouting as he ran. "Move. We've got a clear shot. Let's go." Max followed him without hesitation, darting through the rubble with a speed that belied his exhaustion. Jack's eyes stayed focused ahead, the final stretch of their escape in sight. He could see the chopper in the distance, hovering just above the canyon, its blades whipping through the air. They were so close. As they neared the extraction point, Jack dared a quick glance over his shoulder. The trucks were still coming, but they were too far behind. Caldwell's explosion had bought them precious time. It was the opening they needed. But Jack knew they couldn't let their guard down yet. Blackridge would come after them again. They always did. He pushed himself harder, his body screaming in protest, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when freedom was so close. And then, a voice broke through the chaos. "Jack! Over here!" Caldwell shouted, waving frantically from the chopper. "Hurry!" Without missing a beat, Jack dashed toward the helicopter, Max right at his heels. The others were right behind him, their footsteps a blur of motion. But just as they were about to reach the helicopter, a new sound filled the air, one Jack had hoped he would never hear again. A gunshot. The bullet whizzed past Jack's ear, too close. He dove to the ground instinctively, pulling Max down with him. The team scattered, seeking cover as gunfire rained down from above. "Take cover!" Caldwell barked over the comms. "We've got snipers. We need to move, now." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Snipers. They were trapped again. "Get on the chopper!" Jack shouted, his voice commanding as he scrambled to his feet. "We don't have time." Max was already moving toward the helicopter, barking loudly as if urging everyone to hurry. Jack glanced over his shoulder, spotting the glint of metal on the ridge above. Blackridge's snipers were positioned high, their aim precise. But they weren't going to get him, not today. "Go, go, go!" Jack shouted again, his voice sharp with urgency. Caldwell covered their retreat, his rifle spitting bullets toward the sniper positions, keeping them distracted just long enough. Jack and the team made their final push toward the helicopter, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding with the realization that they were about to escape. The chopper's door opened, and Caldwell was already inside, signaling for them to hurry. Max jumped up into the helicopter first, landing smoothly on the floor. Jack followed immediately, pulling himself inside just as the door slammed shut behind him. And then, as the helicopter lifted into the air, Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe. They had made it. But as the ground shrank below them, Jack's mind couldn't help but linger on the price they had paid to get here. Talon. Blackridge. The countless lives lost in the fight for freedom. And in that moment, Jack realized something he had known all along: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, as they soared into the fading light of the desert horizon, Jack had one thing that mattered most: the freedom to fight another day. And he wouldn't waste it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?